He came in from the east where the road turns red and the horizon bleeds into nothing. No introduction, no announcement. Just a man on a horse, coat thick with trail dust, hat drawn low enough to swallow the top half of his face. He stopped dead center in the street and didn't say a word, just watched. Across the way, a man was being beaten bloody outside the saloon. 3 doors down, a shopkeeper was being dragged by his collar while his shelves were emptied behind him. The townspeople of Deadwood didn't flinch. They had learned long ago that looking away was how you stayed alive. From the porch of his office, Sheriff Elias Boone watched the stranger with different eyes. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had crossed paths with men like this before. Men who moved through the world like weather, quiet until they weren't, and carrying something far more dangerous than guns. Afternoon came heavy. By the time the sun reached the center of the sky, a crowd had formed in the street. Not by choice, by design. In the middle of it all was a young woman named Ayanna. Her wrists and ankles were bound to a crude wooden frame, rope wound so tight that it had already broken the skin. Every small movement sent pain firing through her body. Her breathing came in short bursts. Her eyes were wide and terrified, but somewhere buried beneath all of that, something in her was still refusing to surrender. One of Victor Crow's men, a black vulture enforcer named Boone Cutter, pressed the barrel of his rifle beneath her chin and forced her head up so the crowd could see her face clearly. "Get a good look," he said, wearing a smile that had nothing warm in it. "This is what happens when you don't bend the knee to Victor Crow." Beside him, Harlan Pike flipped a coin into the dirt. "Anyone want to wager how long before she starts begging?" He laughed at his own cruelty. A ripple of hollow laughter moved through the outer edge of the crowd. Deadwood had learned to laugh at the right moments. It was cheaper than bleeding. The stranger moved through the crowd the way water moves through stone, not around it, through it. No hurry. No hesitation. He stopped 4 feet from the wooden frame and looked at Ayanna once, briefly. The way a man looks at a problem he's already decided to solve. Boone Cutter stepped into his path, hand dropping to his holster. "Old-timer," he said, his voice thick with warning. "You're standing somewhere you're going to regret." The stranger didn't look at him. His eyes stayed fixed ahead. "Release her," he said. 2 words. Flat and cold as iron in January. Nobody laughed. Nobody breathed too loudly. Harlan Pike recovered first, stepping sideways with a smirk spreading across his face. "Or what, old man?" His tone was meant to be sharp. Instead, it sounded brittle. The stranger finally turned his gaze, not quickly, not dramatically, and looked at Pike the way a man looks at something already finished. "I don't say things twice." Up on the porch, Sheriff Boone's hand found the grip of his gun. He didn't draw it. He didn't come down. But his jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth because he recognized something in this moment. The exact shape of what comes before everything falls apart. The air went vacuum still. Boone Cutter smiled slowly, turning halfway toward the crowd as if this were theater. "Nobody gives orders in Deadwood," he announced, voice carrying. But today, his smile widened. "Maybe we make an exception." Nobody caught his meaning until his hand moved toward his gun. The shot that followed was singular, clean, final. Nobody saw the stranger draw. One moment his hands were loose at his sides. The next, Boone Cutter was stumbling backward, clutching his stomach with both hands, folding into the dirt like a note being crumpled and thrown away. Harlan Pike's instincts fired before his brain could process what had happened. He went for his gun. He never cleared the holster. A second crack split the air. Pike stood perfectly still for one surreal moment, a small dark hole precisely centered in his forehead. Then the ground came up to meet him, 2 men. 2 bullets. Time elapsed, less than 3 seconds. The crowd didn't scream. They stumbled backward in a single wave, some tripping over each other, most too stunned to make sound. They had seen gunfights before. Deadwood chewed through them the way it chewed through everything else. But this wasn't a gunfight. A gunfight involves 2 sides with a chance. This was something else entirely. "That's enough!" The voice came from behind the scattered crowd. People moved aside without being asked, the kind of instinctive parting that happens when something genuinely dangerous approaches. Victor Crow walked through the gap they made. Tall, angular, dressed in a long dark coat, with eyes like two holes cut in pale fabric. He surveyed the bodies without visible emotion, then redirected his gaze to the stranger. "You killed 2 of my men," he said. The stranger offered nothing in return. He simply stood there, unhurried, like a man waiting for a stage that's already decided to leave without him. Crow gave a small, deliberate nod. 5 o'clock, he said. "Right here. This street." He stepped closer, lowering his voice until it belonged to only the 2 of them. "I'll put you in the ground while the whole town watches." He turned. His remaining men fell into formation behind him, their departure pulling that dense silence along like a tide going out. The stranger holstered his weapon. He walked to the wooden frame, produced a knife, and cut each rope with efficient, practiced strokes. Ayana's legs gave out the instant the last one dropped. He caught her, in firm, steady, but without roughness. "Can you walk?" She didn't answer with words. She nodded. He guided her through the crowd. People moved. Nobody held his gaze. On the porch across the street, Sheriff Elias Boone hadn't moved from his spot. But his hand was wrapped fully around the grip of his revolver now, and it wasn't letting go. Inside Martha Hale's saloon, the light was amber and tired. The smell of whiskey and sawdust and something older hung in the air. Conversation died the moment the doors swung open and the stranger walked in, half supporting a young woman who looked like she'd been through something no one in the room wanted to imagine. Martha Hale looked up from behind the bar. She was the kind of woman Deadwood produced exactly one of, the kind that even the black vultures acknowledged, with a degree of caution they showed almost nobody else. She took in Ayana's condition without flinching, her eyes moving methodically over the rope wounds cutting deep into wrists and ankles. "Table by the window," she said. No shock, no theater. Just direction. She had long since used up whatever capacity she once had to be surprised. The stranger laid Ayana down carefully. Martha moved immediately, bringing water and clean cloth, working the wounds with the calm efficiency of someone who had operated at the intersection of violence and survival for a very long time. "She's lucky the rope didn't go deeper," Martha muttered, half to herself. "Boone Cutter likes to make it last." The stranger said nothing. He stood watching for a moment, then turned and walked out without a word spoken in either direction. The sheriff's office door was open when he arrived. Elias Boone was behind his desk, hand resting on his weapon but not raising it. His expression was the particular kind of careful that comes from a man who has learned to treat surprises as threats. "Sooner than I figured," Boone said. The stranger closed the door behind him. "You let that happen out there," he said. Not as an accusation. More the way you'd read a line from a ledger, factual, recorded, waiting for a response. Boone's jaw flexed. "You don't understand what you've walked into." "I do," the stranger replied. "And so do you. Didn't stop you from staying on that porch." A long silence followed. Then Boone moved to a drawer beneath his desk and lifted out a worn notebook, cover soft with handling, corners bent by years, pages the color of old bone. He set it on the desk between them. 2 years, he said. Every name, every date, every way they died. His voice didn't crack, but it had the texture of something that wanted to. The stranger opened the first page, then the next. The list was long. It was the kind of record that gets heavier each time someone new is added to it. "They have my son," Boone said quietly. 14 years old. The stranger closed the notebook. "What are you waiting for?" Boone looked up. "Enough to make sure that when I move, nobody walks." The stranger gave a single nod. "Today, you've got enough." Boone studied him. "Who are you?" A pause. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "Someone who used to wear a badge," the stranger said. "Someone who learned that sometimes the law shows up after it's already too late." Outside, the wind was beginning to stir. The sun was listing lower in the sky. 5 o'clock was not a concept anymore. It was a destination. Deadwood had never been this quiet for this long. Shutters closed. Doors locked. Eyes found whatever narrow crack let them see the street without being seen by it. Everyone in town had lived long enough under the black vultures to understand what a deadline meant. In front of Martha Hale's saloon, the stranger stood alone. No wall behind him. No shade to hide in. hands at his sides, loose but positioned. Inside, Martha finished wrapping the last of Ayana's wounds. The girl was awake, propped up, staring at the window where the stranger's silhouette held perfectly still against the afternoon light. "Who is he?" Ayana asked. Martha didn't look toward the window. "Someone Deadwood never should have needed," she said. A beat passed. And exactly who it does. Across the street, the sheriff's office door swung outward. Elias Boone stepped through it, down the steps this time, not stopping at the porch. He crossed the street and came to stand a few yards from the stranger. Neither man looked at the other. "You don't owe this town anything," Boone said, eyes trained on the far end of the street. "Neither do you," the stranger replied. Boone exhaled slowly. "I've been standing still too long." "Then stop standing." A gust moved through the street, picking up dust and sending it spiraling. Then from the far end of town, hoofbeats. First one horse, then another, then several more, growing louder with each second until they resolved into shapes coming out of the afternoon glare. Victor Crow rode in first. Long coat, hat low, expression carved from something that had forgotten how to feel uncertainty. Behind him, 6 of the black vultures fanned out as they entered the street, spreading to either side in a wide, practiced arc. They stopped. Crow surveyed the scene. Closed doors, empty boardwalks. No one visible. Something close to satisfaction moved across his face. "See?" he said. "No one in this town believes you're leaving this street on your own feet." The stranger didn't respond. Crow stepped forward. His voice dropped to something almost private. "This isn't a duel," he said. "This is a demonstration." The wind stopped. The world contracted to this one street, these men, and the space between them. A door shut quietly somewhere in the distance. And then a hand moved. Nobody counted. But everyone felt the exact moment it began. Caleb Rusk was the first to reach, nerves getting ahead of judgment. He barely had his hand on the grip when the shot from the stranger reached him first. He folded. On the left, another man had raised his barrel halfway when the second shot arrived. He spun sideways and dropped. 2 shots. 2 men. Under 5 seconds. The remaining 4 came apart. One fired wildly, panic converting his aim to noise. Bullets tore through open air and hit nothing. The stranger moved, not with theatrics, but with the specific, deliberate economy of someone who had done this before and understood that survival requires precision, not speed. 1 shot to the chest, 1 to the throat, 1 through the shoulder of a man who turned to run, and made it 3 steps before the ground ended his retreat. Dust rose. Smoke drifted. The street resolved back into silence. Victor Crow was the only one left standing. He hadn't drawn. He hadn't run. He watched it all with those stone-pale eyes, one hand pressed against his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. Not serious, but enough to reintroduce him to the concept of his own mortality. The stranger stood still, gun level, gaze fixed. The silence between them stretched longer than every gunshot that came before it. Crow studied him. "You're not a regular man," he said. His voice had lost its edge. The stranger said nothing. Behind him came footsteps, steady, deliberate. Sheriff Elias Boone walked into the center of the street. His gun was out. It was aimed at Victor Crow. His hand wasn't shaking. "It's finished," Boone said. Crow looked at him, then back at the stranger. Something calculated moved behind his eyes, the old habit of looking for angles. Then slowly his fingers opened. The revolver fell into the dirt. Deadwood remained silent. No cheering. No one rushing out of doorways. Only the wind moving quietly through the aftermath, carrying gunsmoke north. For the first time and longer than most residents could clearly remember, the particular weight that had settled over Deadwood, the one that makes people watch where they walk and lower their voices and never quite exhale fully, began to lift. The street didn't erupt. It exhaled one by one, doors opened. Townspeople stepped out into the sunlight, moving toward the center of the street the way people move toward something they need to see with their own eyes before they'll believe it. No one celebrated. They looked at the bodies of men who had dictated the terms of their fear for years, now motionless in the dust. And they were quiet with the specific quiet of people reckoning with how much something cost. Victor Crow knelt in the dirt, hands raised, face pale, eyes still refusing to fully surrender even now. Sheriff Boone stood over him. Victor Crow. He said it like a sentence already written, finally being read aloud. You are under arrest for murder, extortion, kidnapping, and conspiracy to operate a criminal enterprise across 3 territories. Crow let out a short, dry sound that might have been a laugh. You think this is over, Boone? Boone didn't respond. He produced a set of iron cuffs and locked them around Crow's wrists. The click of the metal was clean and final. 3 days later, Deadwood looked different. Federal marshals arrived from the east with wagons and documentation and the kind of institutional authority that makes things official. They took Boone's notebook, 2 years of meticulous record-keeping, every name, every date, every crime, and began dismantling what remained of the Black Vultures with the systematic thoroughness of men who had the full weight of federal law behind them. Victor Crow was transported in irons, shackled to the wagon floor, giving no orders. The remaining vultures scattered. Most were caught. Some weren't, the town understood this. Justice rarely arrives with clean edges. Shops reopened fully. Voices returned to the streets at normal volume. Children played in the road without anyone pulling them inside out of reflex. Inside his office, Boone stood alone at his desk. The notebook lay open to its final page. He looked at it a long time. Then he closed it. Slowly, the way you close something you've been carrying for a long time and are finally setting down. The door opened behind him. A federal marshal stepped in. The look on the man's face carried the specific gravity of news that doesn't improve with delivery. Boone didn't ask. We found the boy, the marshal said. He paused. North of town. The old mining site. Boone gave a single nod. He stood at the window and looked at the street below, where things were beginning, genuinely and visibly, to move differently. You did the right thing. Sheriff, the marshal said. Boone was quiet for a long moment. No, he finally said. I just did what should have been done long before any of this. Outside, sunlight laid itself across the main street in long, warm bands. Deadwood breathed. But justice, as the town already knew, never arrives without taking something with it. It didn't come back all at once. Deadwood recovered the way most real things recover, unevenly, imperfectly, gradually. Hammers sounded in the mornings. The smell of fresh lumber replaced the old atmosphere of tension. A mother scolded her son for knocking over a bottle in the street and then went straight back inside without looking over her shoulder. Small things. The kind of small things that only become visible when you notice they've been absent for years. Sheriff Boone walked his morning rounds with steps that had something different in them. Not lightness exactly, but steadiness. The notebook remained on his desk. He didn't feel compelled to open it anymore. People passed the patch of ground in the middle of the street where the gunfight had ended things, and they slowed their pace, and they looked at it briefly, and then they moved on. They understood that whatever had been settled came at a price. They also understood something else, that sometimes what breaks a long silence is a single person who refuses to look away. 3 mornings after the federal marshals left, a horse stood in front of Martha Hale's saloon. Scout, the stranger's horse, stood quietly at the post while its rider tightened the saddlebag straps with practiced efficiency. No audience had gathered. Deadwood had learned to let things go without ceremony. The saloon door opened. Ayanna stepped out into the morning air. She was steadier now. The rope wounds were healing. But the real change was in her eyes. The panic had been replaced by something clearer, more durable. She stopped in front of the stranger. He kept working the straps. You didn't have to do any of it, she said. Her voice was still quiet, but it held. He didn't look up. Out here, he said, working the buckle, some things just have to be done. She took a step closer. Who are you? This time, the real answer. He stopped. He turned and looked at her, not coldly, but not with warmth that offered anything to hold. Just directly. Honestly. Someone passing through. Not an answer anyone would have chosen. But it was the only one available. Ayanna climbed up and settled into the saddle. The stranger mounted behind her. He didn't say anything more. He didn't look back at the street or the buildings or the faces watching from the edges of doors and windows. The horse moved forward, steady, unhurried, and carried them both north, away from Deadwood and its particular history, toward a road that turned red in the morning light and eventually gave way to horizon. Sheriff Boone watched from the far end of the street. He didn't wave. He didn't call out. He gave a single nod when the distance was too great for words anyway. Some people, he understood, aren't built for staying, and making them stay would ruin the thing that made them useful. The two figures grew smaller against the northern landscape. The dust rose and drifted. Then they were gone. Deadwood went back to its morning. New faces would come. New troubles would follow. The West had never run short of either. But this particular story, the one about the afternoon a rider came in from the dust and stood in the center of a street that had forgotten what standing up looked like, that story would stay. Not carved into anything. Not written in any official record. Just carried quietly by the people who were there. Because out here some men carry weapons. Some carry the law, and some carry something harder to name. The rare willingness to arrive at the moment nobody else will, do what has to be done, and then walk away without waiting for thanks. Deadwood remembered. That was enough.